Welcome back. You are watching Global Eye. The European Union is holding its 10th parliamentary election and the first since Brexit. 350 million Europeans across 27 EU countries are voting to select their representatives to the European Parliament. Voting is being held from the 6th June to the 9th of June, and results will be revealed on Sunday once polling stations close in all member states. Election campaigns across EU states were dominated by security and defense matters. Russia's war against Ukraine dominated the discourse. Far-right parties are toppling polls in France, Italy, Netherlands, Belgium, Austria and Hungary. The elections are significant as the EU Parliament has powers to pass laws applicable to all EU members. The election will also determine EU's stand on climate change, migration and greater integration. We are now joined by Carl Bildt, former Prime Minister of Sweden. Mr. Bildt, thank you very much for joining us on the program. Let me begin by asking you about the importance of this election. We've seen the rise of the far right, but do you think they will manage enough votes in order to influence the legislative agenda of the European Union going forward?
Well, as things stands at the moment, and we only have opinion polls from the different member countries, they are unlikely to sort of upset the existing sort of broad coalition that is there in the European Union. That's a coalition between the centre-right EPP, the Social Democrats and the Liberals. That particular coalition is likely to retain a majority. And that's going to be important when it comes to allocating the different personalities, I mean, the Commission President and those. Then, of course, when it comes to it's a 5-year mandate, a lot will happen. And of course, they will have an amount of influence that's unavoidable over part of the legislation, because as you point out, all of the EU legislation is co-decided between the European Parliament and the member states. But they will, of course, be a distinct minority, a somewhat larger minority than in the past, but still a minority.
Right. Mr. Bildt, we have been seeing how the voter interest in the EU Parliament election has been somewhat low. In the last election, the voter turnout was, I think, 50%. This time it is expected around 60%. Is this a bit of a worry that the ordinary European voter is not very interested in this election?
Well, I think if you look at the figures in a more international comparison, we have a turnout in the European Parliament elections that is normally higher than the United States has for electing their president. But we have it lower than in most national elections. And the reason for that is rather simple. In a national election, Sweden or India for that, the question of who's going to be the next prime minister is a fairly obvious one. That is less obvious in the European Union, because the European Union, with sort of 500 million people and with sort of 27 member states, is by definition run as a big coalition all the time. And that means that there is not that direct effect of the vote as you see in a national election where the power in the capital is up for grabs. But as long as we are distinctly high in terms of turnout than the Americans when they elect their president, I think we are broadly okay.
Right. I would like to ask you about the current challenges before the European Union, which you think will be before the Parliament in terms of legislations vis-a-vis supply chains and China, also with regard to migration, issues related to greater integration, nationalism.
There will be quite a number of issues that are going to be tricky. It's going to be a tricky period. It is dominated by primarily, of course, the Russian war and the effect that's going to have. But then also the uncertainty coming out of who's going to be the president of the United States and what kind of trade policies are going to be, or climate policies for that matter, are going to be pursued from the other side of the Atlantic. There's going to be a big push for defense integration, primarily defense industry integration, in order also to be able to more rapidly rearm and support Ukraine so they can defend its freedom and integrity. There's going to be continued issues on migration, which is double-sided, by the way, both sort of reluctant to accept too many refugees, but at the same time, we are dependent upon migration of different sorts. So the flow of talent across the world, we must not be left entirely out of that particular picture. Trade will be important. If it's Trump, it's going to be different protectionism issues that are going to be high on the agenda. Europe is the European Union. We are a very big trading power in the world, and we are dependent upon trade. Pursuing free trade agendas, so free trade agreements will be important. And that's an issue where, of course, these more populist sentiments might create some difficulties.
Mr. Bildt, when it comes to the Ukraine war, do you think this election will probably change the course or change the way the European Union supports Ukraine in the war, especially in terms of military and financial aid?
No, I think it's fairly clear if you look, and this is decided to some extent by the European Union, but primarily by the national governments in the Council of Ministers and in the European Council. The European Parliament has a role, but not the decisive one. You can notice from the different statements that have been coming out that there is a determination to continue and strengthen the support, because this is seen as absolutely vital. Were Russia to succeed in crushing the independence of Ukraine, not only would we have sort of tens and tens of millions of refugees, we would also have a horrible military confrontation in the heart of Europe, upsetting security issues both in Europe and globally for quite some time to come. And that determination is there with the European governments.
Right. And among the voters and among the polls that have been carried out, what is the view towards business links with China, supply chain resilience on China? US is investing a lot on bringing the semiconductor ecosystem back into the United States. Is there clamor within the European Union to also do that, to diversify more and pull out of China, or nothing of that sort at this juncture?
Well, on the semiconductor supply chain, it's primarily a question, I understand, of diversifying out of Taiwan. The Americans are moving from Taiwan to Arizona, whatever is going to be the meaning of that. There are corresponding efforts going on in Europe as well. I think in the order of 50 billion euros invested in new fabs for different semiconductors. I think still the most advanced ones are going to continue to come out of Taiwan. But the diversification is ongoing, and the same applies to other issues. I think battery is an even more critical issue when it comes to EVs and all of the green transition, which is very high up on the European agenda.
Right. My final question, Mr. Bildt, if you could give us a sense of how you view the election outcome in India. Narendra Modi has been elected for a third term, but with reduced numbers, and this is the first time that he will be heading a coalition government. How do you see India's foreign policy challenges at this juncture, and how do you see this result?
I mean, the first thing that should be said is that it's a vindication of the strength of the dynamism of democracy in the world's largest democracy. It shows that democracy actually works, that elections do count. We can't be certain about what's going to be the outcome of election until the election has actually happened. And it turned out that here it was an outcome that was not predicted by opinion polls, not predicted by most of the pundits, but evidently reflected the will of the Indian voters electorate. And now there will be a coalition government. I think that could be a good thing, as a matter of fact. Will it change the foreign policy priorities of India? I doubt that. But that is, of course, up to the new government to make its intentions clear. From the European side, India is a priority partner, no question about that. We have the ongoing talks about a free trade agreement. That's been sort of a valley of tears on both the Brussels and the Delhi side for quite some time. But in view of the global situation and the importance of giving India a stronger role in the global value chains, we really need that agreement. Without that agreement, it will be more difficult. India will always be important, producing in India for India. But if India wants to be part of the global value chains, it needs fairly comprehensive free trade agreements of the sort that Europe has with quite a number of other partners around the world.
All right, Mr. Bildt, thank you very much for joining us on the program, giving us your view on the crucial election for the European Parliament, and also a quick view on the Indian election, and telling us that this shows that democracy actually works. With that, it's a wrap on this edition of Global Eye. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned to CNBC TV 18. News continues on the other side.